Welcome to Thalira Tales, where stories bloom in silence, carrying emotion, mystery, and hidden truth. Step in and let the tale unfold.
When I got home around 3 a.m., the porch light was off and the door was unlocked. But worse, my 5-year-old son was curled up on the freezing kitchen floor, using his jacket as a pillow beside an open window, while in the bedroom, my husband was sleeping with my own sister. I didn't cry. I just turned on the camera and said, "Go on, don't stop. I'm recording. Every second of this will be evidence in court of what you've done." Then I brought back a bucket of ice water and dumped it over the bed. Screams filled the room as I turned away, holding my son tightly and walking out. And in that moment, everything they had carefully built began to collapse. Thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. Now tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining from today? Let's see how far this story has traveled. Please note, some elements of this story are fictional, shaped for storytelling and meaningful reflection. Names and settings are coincidental. The message, however, is one worth holding on to. The porch light was off. That was the first thing I noticed before I even cut the engine. I sat in the driveway with the headlights still on, watching the front of the house, and felt something tighten in my chest that I couldn't immediately name. In 4 years of late nights board meetings that ran past 11 emergency calls pulling me back to the hotel before dawn, industry dinners, where the wine kept flowing and the conversation kept going, and nobody checked the clock, that porch light had never been off. It was motion-activated, automatic, wired into the house's main system. It wasn't the kind of light you forgot to turn on. It wasn't the kind of light that turned itself off. Garrett had noticed the sensor acting up back in the spring, promised to call someone about it. Mentioned it again in August. By September, I had stopped asking. I turned off the engine. The street went quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in November, committing to it. The snow had been falling since early afternoon, thick and unhurried, the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but simply accumulates until the world looks different. Maple Street was white from curb to curb, undisturbed, except for the twin tracks of a salt truck that had passed maybe an hour ago. 14 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that doesn't negotiate. I sat in the car for 90 seconds before I opened the door. I know it was 90 seconds because I watched the dashboard clock. I wasn't sure why I was waiting. It wasn't fear exactly, more like the particular stillness that comes when something in the back of your mind has already processed information your conscious self hasn't caught up to yet. Something was wrong with the dark. I just didn't know which wrong it was. The front door was unlocked. I stood on the front step and tried the handle before I reached for my keys, and it turned. All the way. Unlatched, unbolted, open. Garrett double-locked that door every single night without exception. It was one of his few consistent domestic habits. A small, reliable thing I had come to count on. Deadbolt and chain every night, especially when Finn was sleeping. The door being unlocked at 2:47 in the morning wasn't an oversight. It was an absence of thought about the people who were supposed to be protected inside. I pushed it open slowly and stepped into the hallway. The living room was dim, not dark, but operating on the low amber light of the single lamp we kept on the side table near the window, the one we never fully turned off. On the coffee table, a bottle of wine, 2/3 empty, no coaster underneath it. I crossed the room and looked at the label. Côte du Rhône, a producer from the southern Rhône Valley, not expensive exactly, but deliberate. We didn't keep this in the house. Whoever had opened it had brought it specifically for tonight. That was when I saw the coat. It was draped over the armchair in the corner, the one I used to read in before Finn was born, before reading became a thing I did in 10-minute increments on my phone. A black fur coat, full length, the kind that costs more than it should and announces itself when you walk into a room. I recognized the cut immediately, the particular way the collar sat. 2 Christmases ago, Sloane had given me the identical coat in a warm camel color. When I asked where she'd found it, she said it was her favorite style, that she'd been wanting one for herself in black. This was the black one. I stood very still for a moment looking at it. Then I looked down. On the floor near the base of the armchair, a pair of red high heels, pointed toe kitten heel, the kind of shoes that are chosen to be noticed. Size 7. Sloane wore a 7. I wore an 8.5, which I had always considered one of the universe's minor practical jokes. I was about to step back toward the hallway when my foot caught something near the shoes, a small rectangle of paper partially tucked under the edge of the fur coat, where it had fallen to the floor, one corner stepped on and creased. I picked it up. A bank receipt. The thermal paper kind, slightly warm-looking even when it isn't. Printed header, First National Bank of Miami, South Brickell Branch. Transaction type cash withdrawal. Amount $4,200. Account ending in 7731. Date stamped November 13th, yesterday afternoon. I didn't know what it meant. I knew it meant something. I folded it once and put it in the pocket of my coat, the good wool one I'd worn to the board meeting, and kept moving. Standing in the middle of my own hallway at 10 minutes to 3 in the morning, I did something I almost never do in professional settings and had trained myself not to do in personal ones. I stopped and I took stock. Not of the coat, not of the shoes, not of the receipt in my pocket. Of myself. 8 months ago, I had hired a lawyer. Not because my marriage was ending, I hadn't believed that then, not exactly. But because money had been disappearing from our joint accounts in ways I couldn't explain and Garrett couldn't satisfactorily account for. Small amounts at first, $400, 1 month, 620, the next, then 800. Irregular. Below the threshold that triggers automatic bank alerts, the kind of drain that looks like ordinary household variance until you put 4 months of statements side by side and notice the pattern. I had put 4 months of statements side by side. I had noticed the pattern. The lawyer's name was Margot, a referral from a colleague, a woman who specialized in high-asset divorce proceedings and was known apparently for being very good at preparing for things before they became necessary. I had told her, "I don't think I'm getting divorced. I just think something is wrong with my money." She had listened, asked 12 questions I wasn't expecting, and said, "Then let's make sure you're ready just in case." I had prepared for losing money. I had thought that was what I was preparing for. I looked at the coat on the chair. I looked at the shoes on the floor. I looked at the hallway that led toward the bedrooms, toward the closed doors, toward whatever was producing that faint amber glow under the master bedroom door at the far end. I had not prepared for this. At the end of the hallway on the left was Finn's bedroom. The door was open. Not wide open, just ajar, a 2-inch gap, letting the hallway light fall in a thin line across the carpet inside. Garrett closed that door every single night. It was part of the routine, as automatic as the double lock on the front door, as automatic as the nightlight we'd installed when Finn was 3 and startled easily. The door was never left open. Not once in 2 years. I walked toward it. I put my hand on the doorframe. I pushed it open. The room was empty. Finn's bed, the one with the navy blue comforter and the small stuffed rabbit tucked against the pillow, had not been slept in. The sheets were smooth and undisturbed, exactly the way I had made them that morning before I left for work. Before the 7 a.m. logistics call and the 11 a.m. board meeting and the dinner that had run until 1:30 and the long drive home on icy I-90. My son was not in his room. The sheets were still smooth. I stood in the doorway of Finn's room for just a moment, long enough to confirm what I already knew. The navy comforter undisturbed, the pillow undented, the small stuffed rabbit sitting exactly where I'd placed it that morning. He had not been in this bed tonight. I moved. Bathroom first. I checked the bathroom because that's what you do when your child isn't where he's supposed to be, and your brain is still trying to give the situation a reasonable explanation. The light was off. The step stool he used to reach the sink was pushed against the wall in its usual place. No Finn. The hallway closet next coats the vacuum, a box of winter gear we hadn't unpacked yet. I closed it quietly and stood in the hallway and listened to the house. What I heard was nothing. Not the nothing of an empty house, but the nothing of a house where people are deliberately still. I turned toward the kitchen. The light was on low, the under cabinet strip we kept on at night for the same reason people leave a light on over the stove: practical, habitual, not a choice, so much as a routine. The kitchen was at the back of the house, separated from the living room by a half wall and 3 steps down, and as I came around the corner, I felt the air change. Colder. Noticeably wrongly colder. The window above the sink was open. Not open in a way that suggested ventilation or intention, open 1 inch, maybe slightly more, the kind of gap that happens when someone pushes a window up without thinking and then walks away from it. Outside that window it was 14 degrees. The cold was coming in steadily, quietly, the way cold always enters a room when it's been given even the smallest invitation. And then I saw him. Finn was on the floor beside the refrigerator. He had a habit on nights he couldn't sleep of coming to the kitchen for water. The step stool near the sink told me he had made it that far before lying down. Curled on his side on the tile, his knees drawn up toward his chest the way he slept when he was cold. His jacket, the blue quilted one he wore to daycare, the one with his name written on the tag in black marker, was folded under his head. He'd made himself a pillow out of the only soft thing within reach. The tile beneath him was the large format kind, the light gray porcelain we'd put in during the renovation 3 years ago, chosen because it was easy to clean and looked good in photographs. It held cold the way stone holds cold, completely, without apology. I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and dropped to my knees beside him. My hand went to his back first, then to his neck, the way you check a sleeping child when fear has outrun reason and your body moves before your mind does. He was breathing. His pulse was steady under my fingers. He was alive and he was okay, and he was sleeping on a cold kitchen floor at 3 in the morning while the window above him let in the November air. He stirred when I lifted him. His eyes opened halfway, unfocused, the particular blankness of a 5-year-old pulled out of deep sleep and then closed again. He made a small sound that wasn't quite a word and turned his face into my shoulder. I held him tighter than I needed to, probably tighter than was comfortable, but he didn't protest. Against my cheek, his left cheek felt wrong. I pulled back just enough to look. There was a mark there. A faint redness, the kind of pressure mark that takes time to develop, the kind that means he'd been lying on that side for hours without shifting. The tile had left its impression on my son's face. I carried him to the living room. I didn't look at the armchair when I passed it. I didn't look at the floor near it. I sat on the couch and settled Finn against me, then reached up and unbelted my coat, the charcoal cashmere one I'd put on at 6 this morning for the board meeting. The one that had cost more than I was comfortable admitting, and that I'd justified as a work investment, and draped it over him. He disappeared under it almost entirely, just the top of his dark hair visible above the collar. For a moment I just sat there with my hand on his back, feeling him breathe. My son, 5 years old, sleeping on the floor of his own kitchen alone, cold, with a jacket for a pillow and a window letting in the November dark, while 2 adults 20 feet away apparently had not thought to wonder where he was. I looked at the clock on my phone. 2:58 a.m. From the kitchen I heard the under cabinet light flicker. Once, then steady again. It had been doing that since September, a loose connection somewhere in the wiring. Garrett had said something he'd get to when he had time. In 3 months, he had not had time. I had stopped mentioning it the same way I'd stopped mentioning the sensor on the porch light. The same way I'd stopped asking about a lot of small things that accumulated quietly around the edges of our life together. The flicker lasted maybe 2 seconds, but standing in it in that kitchen with my coat over my sleeping son, and the cold still seeping in from the cracked window, and the mark on Finn's cheek that I couldn't stop seeing even with my eyes closed, something shifted in me, quietly. The way a fault line doesn't announce itself until it's already moved. 8 months ago, I had hired a lawyer named Margot because money was disappearing from our accounts, and I could not make the numbers behave. I had told myself this is a financial problem contained, fixable with the right preparation. I had thought the worst thing waiting for me at the end of this was a hard conversation about money and, maybe, the beginning of a very difficult legal process. I had not thought my child on a cold floor. I had not thought the coat on the chair. I had not thought whatever was behind the bedroom door at the end of the hall with its warm amber light and its absolute silence. I stood up carefully without waking Finn. I smoothed the coat over his shoulders one more time. The cashmere was soft and dark and entirely out of place in this moment, which seemed right somehow, like a small insistence that something decent was still present in this house, even now, even here. I walked back toward the hallway. The light under the bedroom door was amber and steady, warm in the way that lights look warm when everything around them has gone cold. It came from the gap at the bottom of the door like something being offered, or maybe like something being kept. I couldn't tell which yet, and I understood that in about 30 seconds I wouldn't have a choice about finding out. I had opened that bedroom door 10,000 times. I knew exactly how it sounded, the soft click of the handle releasing the slight leftward drift of the door as it swung because the hinge on the upper right had never been properly seated. We'd talked about fixing it the first year in the house. Then we stopped talking about it and just learned to account for the drift. That's what you do with the small misalignments in a life. You adjust. And eventually you stop noticing. I opened it the same way I always had. Garrett was in the bed. Sloane was in the bed. The lamp on the far nightstand was on the small one with the linen shade that we'd bought at an estate sale in Wicker Park the summer before Finn was born, and it cast exactly the kind of warm, intimate light that I had once found comforting in that room. There was no ambiguity in what I was looking at. There was no angle from which it could be explained differently. I had opened the door to my own bedroom, and I was looking at my husband and my sister in my bed, and the lamp was on and the wine was gone, and my son had been asleep on the kitchen floor. I stood in the doorway for 4 seconds. I counted them. Then I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and raised it. "I am recording this," I said, out loud clearly at a volume that filled the room. Not a question and not a threat, a statement of fact delivered so that both people in that bed could hear it and could never later claim they hadn't. In Illinois, recording a conversation requires the consent of all parties involved. Announcing the recording in a space where everyone present can hear it establishes that consent on the record. Margot had explained this to me once in passing, the way she explained a lot of things matter-of-factly thoroughly, as though she assumed I would need the information eventually. She had been right. Garrett opened his eyes. He looked at me and said nothing. He didn't reach for the lamp or the sheet or his phone. He didn't call my name. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately catalog. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated than guilt. Something that had been prepared in advance and was now being deployed. I had seen that expression before in boardrooms. I had never expected to see it here. Sloane pulled the sheet up. It was a practiced gesture, smooth, unhesitating, the motion of someone who had thought about this moment and knew what to do in it. I noted that. I was noting everything. On her side of the bed, on the nightstand, was a small notebook. Navy blue cover, soft leather, a white adhesive label on the front, with handwriting I recognized as hers, neat, deliberate, slightly back-slanted. The label read, "What she owes me." 4 words in her handwriting on a notebook she had apparently brought to my house and left on the nightstand next to my bed. I photographed it without touching it or opening it. I didn't know yet what it meant. I knew it meant something. I filed it the same way I'd filed the bank receipt, in the category of things I didn't understand yet but would. On the dresser I saw the papers. A document packet unstapled the top page bearing the header of the Cook County Circuit Court. I crossed the room without looking at either of them and picked it up. I read the first page in approximately 8 seconds. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner Garrett Hale. Respondent Elise Hale. There was a section for minor children. Finn's name was on it. The filing date stamped in the upper right corner was August 14th, 2024. 3 months ago. He had filed this 3 months ago and had not yet had me served. He had been waiting, for a moment, for a trigger for whatever the right circumstances looked like to him. He had been living in this house with me and with our son for 3 months, with this document already in the system, and every morning he had made coffee, and every evening he had closed Finn's door, and he had been waiting. I set the papers down, took a photograph of the filing date, then picked them back up and held them. I looked at the two of them, Garrett still silent, Sloane not quite meeting my eyes, and I walked to the bedroom door. Then I stopped. I turned back to the kitchen. I knew the layout of my own house. I knew where things were kept. The ice bucket was on the counter where we'd left it during a dinner party. In October, we used it often enough that it lived there between uses, full of whatever was in the freezer. I filled it at the sink. Cold tap all the way. 30 seconds. The water was very cold. I carried it back down the hall. I stood in the bedroom doorway one more time, and I looked at them, both of them, my husband and my sister, in my bed in my house, while my son had been asleep on the floor, and then I emptied the entire bucket over the bedding beside them. Not at them. The sheets, the blanket, the bed that had been made into something I didn't recognize. The distinction mattered to me even then. The sound Garrett made was somewhere between a shout and a gasp. Sloane screamed a short, sharp sound that cut off almost immediately, as though she caught herself. The sheets, the blanket, the pillow on Garrett's side, all of it soaked in an instant. He lurched upright, sputtering, and for one moment his expression dropped whatever it had been wearing before and showed something raw and unguarded underneath. I set the empty bucket on the floor. "I have the video," I said. "I have the filing date, I have the notebook, and I have everything Margot has been building for 8 months. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "Don't call me tonight." I walked back to the living room. I lifted Finn, still sleeping somehow the profound sleep of a 5-year-old undisturbed by adult chaos, and held him against my shoulder. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the bag on the upper shelf. Olive green canvas duffel packed on a Sunday afternoon 8 months ago at Margot's instruction, 6 months of bank statements, copies of the property deed and Finn's birth certificate, 2 changes of clothes for each of us, his asthma inhaler, his backup stuffed rabbit. Garrett had never once opened that closet. He had no reason to know the bag existed. I took my keys from the hook by the door. I stepped outside. The cold hit my face like a clean slate. At the car, I buckled Finn into his seat. The motion woke him part way. His eyes opened, heavy-lidded and confused, and he looked at me with the expression children have when the world has shifted while they were sleeping, and they haven't decided yet whether to be frightened. "Mommy," he said, "where are we going?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "We're going on an adventure," I told him. "Just the two of us." He considered this for a moment the way 5-year-olds consider things seriously without irony, giving the information its full due. Then he nodded once, tucked his chin down, and closed his eyes again. I got in the driver's seat. I looked at the house one more time in the rearview mirror, the dark porch, the unlocked door I hadn't stopped to lock behind me, the single lit window of the bedroom at the back. I didn't know yet what came next, but I knew that every piece of what came next would be built from what I had just collected. 3 items in my coat pocket, a video on my phone, a bag in the trunk, and my son breathing steadily in the back seat. That was enough to start. Chicago at 3 in the morning in November is almost peaceful. That's the thing nobody tells you about the city in the worst hours, how quiet it gets, how functional and indifferent. The expressway was empty except for a convoy of orange salt trucks moving north in slow, deliberate formation, their yellow lights pulsing in the dark. The road surface was white and untouched ahead of me. The buildings along the lakefront stood the way they always stood, lit from within, unbothered by what was happening in any one car on any one road at any particular hour. Finn was asleep again before I'd cleared the first intersection. I could see him in the rearview mirror, head tipped to the side, mouth slightly open, exactly the same posture he fell into every night in his own bed. Children carry their sleep with them, I'd noticed. Wherever they are, it finds them again. I drove carefully, both hands on the wheel, watching the road and the mirror in turns. The heater was on high. Outside, the snow was still falling. Lakeshore Drive at this hour was a different thing from what it was during the day, emptied out, almost ceremonial. The lake invisible behind a wall of dark and weather, but present in the way. It was always present, something vast and cold and completely uninterested in human arrangements. I drove north and let the quiet do what quiet does when everything else has run out of things to say. I let myself remember how I had gotten here. 8 months ago in March, I had noticed something wrong with the numbers. Not dramatically wrong, not a missing zero, or a sudden large withdrawal that would have triggered an automatic bank alert. Wrong in the way that things are wrong when someone who knows what they're doing is trying not to be noticed. $400 in February categorized under home maintenance, $620 in March, split across two separate transactions 3 days apart, $800 in April in two installments, each amount small enough to fall below the threshold that flags irregularities, each one individually explainable. All of them together laid out in a row across 4 months of statements, making a pattern I couldn't argue away. I had put the statements side by side on a Saturday morning while Garrett took Finn to the park. I had sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes with a yellow legal pad doing the arithmetic I already knew the answer to. Then I had called a colleague and asked for a referral. Margot's office was on the 42nd floor of a building on Wacker Drive. She was known, my colleague said, for being meticulous and for being early to prepare early, to file early, to anticipate what the other side would do before they knew they were going to do it. She charged accordingly. I had made the appointment for the following week. My first words to her, as close as I can reconstruct them: I don't think I'm getting divorced. I think something is wrong with my money and I need to understand what before I do anything about it. She had listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then she asked 12 questions in order without preamble. At the end of the 12th, she said, "Here's what you're going to do. You're not going to confront anyone and you're not going to change any account passwords that creates a trail that can be used against you, and it tells whoever is doing this that you know. What you're going to do is let me build the picture quietly while everything stays in place, and you're going to prepare a bag." A bag, she said. Documents, copies, nothing original. 6 months of bank statements printed, the property deed, birth certificates, social security cards, a change of clothes for each of you and for your child, any prescription medications. Keep it somewhere accessible that the other person doesn't know about. You may never need it, she said, but if you do, you'll need it all at once. I had packed it on a Sunday afternoon while Garrett was watching football, and Finn was napping. I had been methodical about it, the way I was methodical about most things: list first, then items, then a final check against the list. I had put the bag on the upper shelf of the hallway closet behind the winter coats and told myself it was a precaution, not a prophecy. 7 months later, I had taken it off that shelf and put it in the trunk of my car. There was another thing I hadn't understood at the time, and understood now with a clarity that felt almost physical, the way understanding something too late feels less like insight and more like impact. 6 months ago, Garrett had come to me with a suggestion about Finn's college fund. The trust had been set up in Finn's name when he was born, funded steadily over 5 years, sitting in a low-risk account that I reviewed every quarter. Garrett's suggestion was reasonable on its face: add him as co-trustee. So the administrative burden didn't fall entirely on me during a particularly demanding stretch at work. "You've got enough to manage," he'd said. "Let me carry some of this." I had signed the paperwork at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. I was in the middle of a hotel expansion negotiation that had been running for 4 months and was finally reaching its critical Phase 3 conference calls that week. 2 site visits scheduled, a financing structure that needed to close by the end of the quarter. I had read the summary paragraph and signed. I had not read the full trustee amendment. I understood now what co-trustee access meant in the hands of someone who had been planning to use it. And then there was the other thing, the thing from 3 months ago that I kept turning over now in the dark, trying to find the angle at which it looked like what I had believed it was. 3 months ago, Garrett had been kind. Not the ordinary maintenance-level kindness of a functioning marriage, but deliberate, attentive, specific kindness. Coffee waiting when I came downstairs. Questions about my week that showed he'd remembered what I'd said about my week the week before. Offers to handle the daycare drop-off on the mornings I had early calls which freed me up in ways I had genuinely appreciated. I had thought, something has shifted between us. I had thought this is what a good stretch feels like after a difficult one. I had been relieved. I could see it differently now. He had been asking about my schedule, about my meetings, about which evenings ran late, about which days I worked off-site. I had answered him easily and openly the way you answer someone you trust with the details of your days. I had been providing a calendar. He had been building one. My phone buzzed against the center console. I glanced at it at a red light. Michigan and Ontario, the intersection empty a city plow grinding through from the east and pushing a ridge of gray snow against the curb. A text from Margot room 1408 is held. I'm awake. Come when you're ready. I had texted her from the car before I pulled out of the driveway. 3 words. Nothing specific. The kind of message we had agreed early on would serve as a signal if a signal was ever needed. She had responded in 4 minutes. She had the room already. I sat at the red light and read the message twice. Margot had been ready for this night. She had structured her preparation so that when it came, if it came, nothing would need to be built from scratch. I had hired her because something was wrong with the money, and she had seen, perhaps before I had, that something wrong with the money was rarely only about the money. She had prepared for tonight, I thought. And I had prepared for the wrong thing entirely. The light changed. I drove north. The Gwen's lobby windows were lit from inside that particular warm gold that hotel lobbies maintain at every hour. The deliberate professional warmth that says someone is here. This is a safe place, you can stop moving now. I pulled into the drop-off lane, cut the engine, and sat for just a moment in the silence before I had to begin whatever came next. Finn stirred when I lifted him out of his seat. He was warm and heavy with sleep, and he made a small sound of protest that faded immediately as I settled him against my shoulder. I picked up the duffel with my free hand, pushed the car door closed with my hip, and walked through the revolving door into the light. I did not look back at the street. Room 1408 smelled like clean linen and central heating and nothing else. That nothing else was the thing I noticed most, the deliberate blankness of a well-maintained hotel room stripped of history designed to belong to whoever needed it at a given moment. I had worked in hospitality long enough to understand exactly what went into producing that particular quality of neutral. Tonight, for the first time, I was grateful for it. I set Finn down on the far bed, the one closer to the window. He made a small sound when I lowered him, a brief protest from somewhere deep in sleep, and then settled, one arm thrown out to the side, his breathing evening out immediately. I pulled the hotel blanket up to his shoulders and stood there for a moment watching his chest rise and fall. Then I sat on the edge of the near bed and did not move. I still had my coat on. The wool was damp at the collar from the snow, and I was aware of that in a distant logistical way, the way you register physical discomfort when your mind is occupied with something that makes physical discomfort irrelevant. I sat with my hands in my lap and my coat still buttoned and watched the digital clock on the nightstand change from 4 o'clock to 4:01 to 4:02. Then I picked up my phone and called Margot. She answered on the second ring. Not the groggy, gradually focusing voice of someone pulled out of sleep. She answered the way she answered during business hours, alert and already present. She had been awake since my text from the car. I had expected nothing less. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Take your time, I told her. I went through it in sequence the way I would have briefed a board: the porch light, the unlocked door, the wine, the coat, the shoes. The receipt I had found on the floor near the armchair: First National Bank of Miami, $4,200, account ending in 7731. The bedroom. What I had seen there. The notebook on the nightstand, photographed but not opened. The divorce papers on the dresser, Cook County filing date August 14th. I told her about the ice water. I told her I had announced the recording first out loud the way she'd once explained I would need to. She said, "Good." I told her about the go bag already in the trunk. I told her where I was. When I finished, I transferred the video file and the notebook photograph to the encrypted sharing platform Margot's office used for sensitive materials, a system I'd been given access to 8 months ago when we first started building the paper trail. The upload took 40 seconds. She confirmed receipt. "The divorce petition," she said. "I'm pulling the Cook County records right now." I could hear her typing. A pause. "It's here. Filed August 14th. Not yet served." Another pause. He was waiting. He needed something, a moment, a catalyst, a circumstance that would let him claim the moral high ground before you could establish yours. She said it without editorializing, the way she delivered all information as fact, not as condolence. He was waiting for tonight. "How long have you known it was coming?" I asked. "I didn't know. I suspected the shape of it." She paused. "I've been running a soft audit on your shared accounts for the past 2 weeks. There are transactions I can't account for with the information I have access to. I need Roland to look at the full picture." Roland was her forensic accountant, a specialist she brought in on cases where the financial complexity exceeded what standard discovery could efficiently untangle. I had not yet met Roland. I had heard Margot mention his name twice in 8 months, and both times it had been in the context of cases where significant assets had been deliberately obscured. The fact that she was invoking him now told me something about the scale of what she suspected. "How much?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know the silence of someone deciding how to deliver information that will land hard. "Based on what I can see right now without Roland's full analysis, I think we're looking at somewhere close to $94,000, possibly more." She added, "That's an estimate from incomplete data. Roland will give us the real number by tomorrow afternoon." $94,000. I sat with that number for a moment. I had been managing 9-figure budgets for 5 years. I understood money at a scale that made $94,000 a small line item in the wrong context. But this was not the wrong context. This was Finn's college fund. This was the life insurance policy I had taken out when he was born and named him as beneficiary. This was the account I had built from nothing before the hotel group, before the title, before any of it. The account that was supposed to mean that no matter what happened, certain things were protected. The floor did not literally tilt, but something shifted low and physical somewhere below the level of thought. "I'll be there by 8, Margot said. "Get some sleep if you can." I said I would, and we ended the call, and I sat on the edge of the bed for another minute without moving. Then I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and closed the door quietly behind me. I turned the cold tap on. Not for any practical reason, just for the sound of it, and for the privacy the sound provided. Then I sat down on the edge of the tub and I cried. I watched the clock on my phone while I did it. 4 minutes, I had decided, 4 minutes. Though I couldn't have told you why, 4 specifically, only that it felt like the right duration for what I was allowing myself. Enough to be real. Not enough to become something I couldn't pull back from. When the 4 minutes were up, I turned off the tap, washed my face with cold water, and stood in front of the mirror until my breathing was even. The woman in the mirror looked tired. She looked like someone who had been awake for 22 hours and had spent the last 90 minutes of them doing things she hadn't expected to have to do. She also looked, I thought, like someone who had not yet made a single mistake tonight, who had collected everything she needed, who had called the right person. I turned off the bathroom light and went back to the bed. Finn hadn't moved. I lay down beside him on top of the covers still in my coat and put one hand near his shoulder without touching him, just close enough to feel the warmth coming off him. The room was quiet. Outside Michigan Avenue was empty and white. I thought about the number Margot had given me. I thought about what Roland would find when he looked at the full picture. I thought about the notebook I had photographed and still hadn't opened, and what 4 words written in my sister's handwriting on a cover might mean. I didn't have answers to any of it yet. Tomorrow, I would start getting them. I had cried for 4 minutes, I thought. Starting tomorrow, I would need every hour. At 5:47 a.m., Finn murmured my name in his sleep. Just once, not distressed, not questioning, just the random auditory surfacing that children do when they dream. He didn't wake. He just said my name into the dark and then was quiet again. I stayed very still and let that be enough for now. By 8 o'clock, the snow had stopped. Michigan Avenue outside the window was white and completely still, the kind of silence that only settles after a storm has finished saying everything it came to say. The plows had been through while we slept. The street below ran in 2 cleared lanes, sidewalks edged with gray-white ridges that caught the flat morning light. The sky had lifted from black to pale silver, which was what passed for dawn in Chicago in November. Finn was sitting up in his bed asking about the waffle maker, not anxiously with genuine logistical interest. Round waffles or square ones? Could you put syrup on both kinds? I told him I believed the answer to all 3 questions was yes, and watched something settle in his face that I recognized as satisfaction. We ordered room service. Finn separated his fruit by color into distinct territories on the tablecloth, then ate his waffles with the focused dedication he reserved for things he considered important. I drank black coffee and let myself have 10 minutes of just watching him. Then, without looking up from his plate, he said, "Daddy said Aunt Sloane was coming to make pancakes last night." I set my cup down, carefully without a sound. "He told me before I went to sleep." Finn continued spearing a piece of waffle. "She was going to make the blueberry kind, from the box." "That's nice, baby," I said in exactly the tone I'd have used if he'd told me about a song he heard at daycare. My voice did not change. My face did not change. But I held my coffee cup without drinking from it for a long moment after. The evening hadn't been impulsive. Sloane had been invited, told when to arrive, what to bring, what to make, while I sat in a board meeting 40 minutes away while I drove home on icy roads, while I walked into my own house at 2:47 in the morning. It had been arranged. All of it. I set that fact aside. There would be time for its full weight later. Margot arrived at 10 o'clock with Roland's preliminary findings. He'd been working since before 7 that morning. She placed a single page on the desk between us while Finn watched cartoons across the room. One name underlined at the top, Meridian Consulting, LLC, registered in Portland, Oregon. 14 months ago, listed Purpose Management Consulting. A registered agent whose name meant nothing to me. Below it, 3 transfers from our joint checking account, $8,400, then $11,200, split across 2 transactions, then $11,400, processed in smaller increments over a week. All of them routed to Meridian. All of them in amounts and patterns that had slipped below the bank's automatic alert threshold. I had no connection to Portland. I had never heard of Meridian Consulting. I had never signed a contract with anyone by that name. "Who owns it?" I asked. "That's what Roland is still pulling," Margot said. "The registered agent is a placeholder. The actual ownership structure requires a deeper records request. He'll have it by early afternoon." I looked at the page. Portland, Oregon. The name sat there with the particular blankness of something that knows exactly what it is and is simply waiting for you to figure it out. Finn said, "Mommy, come look." He was at the window standing on the lower bar of the radiator cover for height, his nose nearly touching the glass. On the stone ledge outside, a cluster of pigeons had landed in the snow, 8, maybe 10, moving in their small investigative circles. I walked over and stood beside him. "That one's Gerald," he said, immediately pointing at the nearest gray one. "That one's Captain," a larger bird to the left. "That one doesn't have a name yet." He indicated a smaller one at the edge, standing slightly apart, head turning in precise little rotations. "How do you know which one is Gerald?" I asked. He looked at me as though the question barely deserved an answer. "Because he looks like a Gerald." I held the Meridian page in one hand and watched my son assign identities to 10 pigeons on a snow-covered ledge, and I thought this was what the money was for. This was what the accounts and the transfers and the name on an Oregon LLC registration were ultimately about, not the figures, not the legal exposure, but this boy at the window naming birds with complete authority, believing entirely that we were on an adventure. I would not let this become something that took that from him. My phone rang at 11:14. Roland. His voice had the careful flatness of someone who has found something that made him angry on your behalf and is working hard to stay professional about it. "I found the owner of Meridian," he said. "You need to come see this in person." Before I show you the exact numbers Roland laid on that table, comment 94 right now so I know you're still with me. Because what came next wasn't just a betrayal, it was architecture. Note the story ahead carries some fictional elements woven in for depth and narrative purpose. It may not reflect every detail of reality. If that's not for you, it's completely okay to step away now. Roland's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on LaSalle Street, where the financial district meets the river and the wind off the water hits, at an angle that makes even warm days feel like they have an edge to them. I had been here once before, last spring, a routine portfolio review that had taken 40 minutes and required no decisions. That visit felt like it had happened to a different woman entirely. I left Finn with the hotel's childcare service before I came a supervised play program the concierge had arranged, staffed by 2 certified child development workers in a dedicated suite 2 floors below ours. Finn had gone, willingly distracted immediately by a bin of building blocks the size of his forearm. I had checked the emergency contact form twice before I signed it. The elevator opened directly into Roland's reception area. He was waiting at the door to his office when I stepped off, a compact man in his late 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, a suit that said he took precision seriously as a value rather than a performance. He shook my hand briefly, let us in, and closed the door. The room was all glass and organized paper. Chicago spread out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling window, the river catching the gray midday light below the building, stepping back in layers toward the lake. I sat across from him. Margot sat beside me. Roland set a folder on the desk and opened it without preamble. "I'll walk you through it by source," he said. The first number, $31,000. Withdrawn from the joint checking account over 14 months, September of last year through this past October. Not in one transfer, not in any amount that would have triggered the bank's automated fraud detection algorithm, which Roland noted was calibrated to flag unusual patterns in the $8,000 to $10,000 range for accounts with our transaction profile. Every single transfer was structured below $3,000. 11 separate transactions, each one individually unremarkable, collectively accounting for $31,000, routed to Meridian Consulting LLC in Portland, Oregon. "Whoever did this understood how bank monitoring works," Roland said in the tone of someone making a factual observation rather than offering praise. "This wasn't guesswork. It was structured deliberately." The second number, $28,000. From Finn's College Trust, the account I had opened the year he was born, funded steadily for 5 years, sitting in a low-risk portfolio that I reviewed every quarter. Over the past 8 months, the co-trustee on record had exercised withdrawal authority 7 times. Each withdrawal had been below the threshold that would have generated an automatic trustee notification to the account's originating attorney. Total removed, $28,000. Roland paused here. He looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "A co-trustee has a fiduciary duty to the trust's beneficiary. That means every decision made under that authority is legally required to serve the beneficiary's interest, in this case, your son. Moving trust funds into a personal account in Miami does not serve your son's interest. This is a breach of fiduciary duty, and it is actionable both civilly and criminally under Illinois law." I nodded once. I did not look away from the folder. The third number, $35,000. A policy loan taken against my life insurance, a whole life policy I had held for 11 years with a cash value that had accumulated to just over $60,000. A policy loan doesn't require the policyholder's consent if a valid power of attorney is on file. A POAI had signed at a kitchen table during a hotel financing negotiation, because the person who handed it to me said it was for estate planning purposes, and I had been on a call with a contractor in Phoenix at the time, and I had signed it. The loan had been processed 4 months ago. The funds had been dispersed directly. "Power of attorney is a fiduciary instrument," Roland said. "Using it for self-dealing to benefit the agent rather than the principal is a civil tort and potentially a criminal offense under Illinois statute. It doesn't matter that the signature was legitimate. The purpose it was used for was not. 3 sources, 3 different mechanisms, 1 destination." Roland turned to the final page and placed it in front of me. "First National Bank of Miami South Brickell Branch. Account name G. Whitmore and S. Hargrove. Account number ending in 7731. I recognized the account number immediately. It matched the last 4 digits on the receipt I had found on my living room floor the night before, the one that had been lying near the armchair partially stepped on. I had not known then what it meant. I knew now. Hargrove. Sloane's last name was Hargrove. There was no other S. Hargrove in the context of my life. G. Whitmore. I turned the name over in my mind, the way you turn over a stone you haven't seen before, looking for something familiar in the shape of it, some angle from which it resolved into something known. There was nothing. I had never heard that name in any context I could locate. "When was this account opened?" I asked. 19 months ago," Roland said. "May of last year, before the first transfer from your joint account, before the first trust withdrawal." He let that sit for a moment. "The account wasn't created to receive the money. The money was moved to fill an account that was already waiting for it. This was not a crime of opportunity. The thought arrived fully formed with the particular weight of something that had been true for a long time before I understood it. This was architecture. Someone had drawn blueprints and built the house around me while I was still living in it." The login history for the Miami account. Roland continued pulling another sheet, shows access from 2 IP addresses. The first resolves to your Lincoln Park address, your home network. The second is a residential address in a different zip code. I haven't fully resolved it yet. I'll have the location by end of day. I filed that information. A second location. Someone else with access. My phone vibrated on the desk beside me. I glanced at the screen. A text from Derek Slade. "Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's okay. Let me know if you need anything." Derek had been a colleague at Lowe's Chicago for 3 years, someone I had worked alongside closely enough to consider reliable the way you consider. Reliable, the people who show up consistently and don't create problems. I hadn't spoken to him in 10 days. The timing of the message was odd in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. The way a sound is odd when it arrives a half-second after the thing that should have caused it. I turned the phone face down and returned my attention to Roland. He was gathering the documents back into the folder, aligning the edges with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom order was a working condition. I watched his hands and said nothing for a moment. Then I said the name aloud quietly once more, to hear it in my own voice than for any other reason. G. Whitmore. It sat wrong in my mouth, like a word in a language I didn't know I had already been speaking. I picked Finn up from the hotel childcare at 3 o'clock. He had made a dog with 6 legs and an expression of remarkable self-possession rendered in the orange and green markers that apparently had been the most appealing options available. He presented it to me with both hands formally the way children present things they have decided are significant. I took it with both hands the same way, because it deserved that. I folded it carefully and put it in my coat pocket next to the Miami receipt. Back in the room, Finn settled on the floor near the window with the hotel notepad and a cup of pens he'd assembled from the nightstand, and what appeared to be a previous guest's forgotten ballpoint that had been under the radiator. He began drawing a second dog, this one with 7 legs, apparently committed to a pattern. I sat at the small desk and opened my laptop and did what I had been doing in every available gap between the events of the last 12 hours. I worked. Not because there was nothing else to think about, because there was too much, and work was the container that kept my mind from spreading in directions I couldn't afford yet. At 4:15 my phone rang. "Margot, I have something from the investigator," she said. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" I looked at Finn. He was fully absorbed in his drawing, narrating something quietly to himself in the tone children use when they are both author and audience. I moved to the bathroom, left the door partially open, and sat on the edge of the tub the way I had the night before, except this time I did not turn on the tap. "Go ahead," I said. Margot's investigator, a woman she had been using for 3 years on cases involving financial concealment and corporate asset disputes, had been monitoring Derek Slade's professional communications since early in the summer. Not his personal phone, his work account, the internal messaging and email system used by Lowe's Chicago Hotel, which the company's legal department had granted access to as part of a confidentiality compliance review. Margot had subpoenaed those records through the firm's existing discovery channels 6 weeks ago, when Derek's name had surfaced in a pattern of communication she hadn't been able to fully explain. The records had come in that morning. "I'm going to read you 2 messages," Margot said. "The first was sent 11 weeks ago. She's been talking to a lawyer named Margot. I think she knows about the money. Sent from Derek's work account. Recipient an external personal email address that Roland had since linked to Garrett Hale." The second message was sent 3 weeks later. "Roland is involved now. You need to move faster." I sat on the edge of the tub and looked at the grout line between the tiles on the wall opposite me. I looked at it for a long time. It was very straight, very white, the kind of meticulous detail that good hotels maintain, because the guests who notice it have paid for the right to. 3 weeks ago. I had come downstairs on a Thursday morning to find coffee already made, not the auto-drip kind, but the pour-over kind that Garrett made when he was paying attention. He had asked about my week. He had asked whether the quarterly review was going well, whether I was sleeping enough, whether I wanted him to handle the daycare pickup on Friday so I could leave early for a site visit. I had thought something had shifted. I had felt for the first time in months like the ground between us was stabilizing. He had been reading a text from Derek Slade and calculating how quickly he needed to move. He had smiled at me across the breakfast table, I thought, while someone was messaging him instructions to finish what they had started. I stayed in the bathroom for 2 minutes after Margot finished. Then I stood up, checked my reflection, once a habit, not vanity, a way of confirming I was still coherent, and walked back out to the room. Finn looked up from his drawing. "How many legs does a real dog have?" he asked. "4, I said. He considered this. "Mine has 7. I noticed. "I think 7 is better," he said, and returned to his work. I sat at the desk and called Margot back. I told her not to approach Derek, not to have the investigator make any contact, not to change anything in the monitoring arrangement. I told her to preserve every record in the format that would be most useful for discovery. She said she already had. I told her I'd talk to her in the morning, and we ended the call. The rest of the afternoon passed in the particular suspended quality of a day that has already given you everything it has, and is now simply requiring you to remain upright until it ends. Finn finished 3 drawings. He ordered chocolate milk with dinner and drank it with a seriousness that suggested he understood it was a special occasion item. We watched half an animated film on the hotel television, something involving a bear and a competition of some kind, before his eyes started losing their battle with gravity. Is Daddy going to read to me tonight? He asked somewhere in the middle of the bear's second setback. The question landed the way questions land when they are asked, without any awareness of their weight. Not tonight, bub, I said. It's just us on this adventure, remember, I'll read. He accepted this with the trust that 5-year-olds extend to their primary caregiver, which is the most complete trust in the world and the most difficult thing to hold. I found the book on the nightstand, a slim anthology the hotel kept as a room amenity, illustrated American folk stories, the kind of collection assembled for guests who wanted something quiet and unchallenging before sleep. I opened it to a story about a bird, a small brown one with no distinguishing markings that gets separated from its flock over the Great Plains and has to navigate its way back home using nothing but the angle of the light and the direction of the wind and the memory of what home felt like. It was a simple story. It was in the way that simple stories sometimes are exactly right. I read it in a steady voice. Finn was asleep before the bird crossed the Missouri River. I finished the story anyway. I sat in the half-dark room for a long while after the book still open in my lap, the only light coming from the city outside the window. I thought about Derek Slade, about 3 years of working alongside someone, about the specific texture of professional trust, which is different from personal trust but not less real. I thought about the word faster in his message, and what it said about his understanding of what Garrett was doing, and his decision to help it along anyway. I thought about the things you don't see until you have no choice but to see them. At 9:03 p.m., my phone lit up on the nightstand, a name I hadn't seen in 2 weeks. Nora Callahan. Nora had been my closest friend for 7 years, the kind of friend who knew which silences meant something and which ones didn't, who had been at my hospital room when Finn was born, and at my side when the hotel group closed its first major acquisition, and who had, for reasons I had not yet understood, gone quiet on me in the middle of October without explanation. I answered on the second ring. "Aye, Elise." Her voice was careful in the way that voices are careful when they are carrying something heavy and trying not to drop it. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 3 years ago." Nora had asked to meet in Evanston Neutral Ground, she said. Far enough from Lincoln Park that neither of us would need to keep watching the door. I drove up with Finn asleep in his car seat, the expressway quiet in the gray November morning. When I lifted him into the stroller outside the cafe, he stirred, opened his eyes, halfway looked at me with the weightless confusion of a child not yet fully back in the world, then closed them again. I tucked the blanket around him and pushed through the door. Nora was already there. Corner table back to the wall, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't touched. She looked the way people look when they've been awake rehearsing something for hours and are now exhausted by the preparation. I settled Finn's stroller where I could see him, ordered a coffee, and sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The cafe moved around us, a student at a laptop, a barista restocking the pastry case, the low murmur of other people's ordinary mornings. Finn slept. I waited. "Start wherever makes sense," I said. She looked at her mug, then at me. 3 years ago, she said, I saw Garrett and Sloane together at a restaurant in River North. I was nearby and I walked past the window. The way they were sitting. She stopped. It wasn't ambiguous, but I told myself it was. I told myself I was projecting. She had taken a photograph before she talked herself out of what she was seeing. An instinct, she said. She hadn't deleted it. Over the following months, she saw them twice more, once in Wicker Park on a Saturday afternoon, once outside a bank branch on the eastern edge of the Loop. Each time photographs. Each time days spent constructing explanations for what she'd seen. "I have 17 pictures," she said, and slid her phone across the table. I looked at them. River North, the two of them, at a corner table in a way that had nothing to do with family. Wicker Park, Garrett's hand at the small of Sloane's back. The Loop branch, Sloane outside the entrance, a transaction receipt in her hand, the signage clearly visible First National Bank South Loop branch. The same routing network Roland had flagged in his preliminary report. I handed the phone back without a word. "There's something else," Nora said. "Something Sloan told me. 2.5 years ago at a birthday dinner I'd hosted my father's, which meant Sloan had been there. Late in the evening, Nora had found herself alone with Sloan in the kitchen. Sloan had been drinking just enough to move her honesty closer to the surface. Elise got everything she had said. The tuition, the school, the attention. I got what was left over after she was done. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about the notebook I had photographed in my bedroom 2 nights ago, the small navy cover, the white label, the handwriting I had recognized immediately. What she owes me. 4 words I had filed without understanding. I understood them now. I hadn't needed to open the notebook. I had just needed this conversation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Nora had the look of someone who had answered that question for herself many times without finding a satisfying answer. I kept thinking I'd misread it, and every month that passed made it harder, because saying it meant I'd been sitting on it, and that had its own weight. I sat with that. Then I said, "I'm glad you called, now." I didn't say it was all right. It wasn't. But I needed what she had, and I needed her steady, and I couldn't spend what it would cost to be angry at her today. That was a calculation I was aware I was making, and I made it deliberately. "I'm going to ask Margot to get these photos into the record," I said. "Will you cooperate?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." At 1:07 p.m., Roland called. He had spent the morning cross-referencing the names on the Miami account against Meridian Consulting LLC's Oregon registration records, a public business filing that listed both G. Whitmore and S. Hargrove as principals. Sloan Hargrove was the primary member of record. Her name, her signature, her Chicago contact address. The account in Miami had been structured to mirror the LLC. Her name first, his second. She had set it up before he was added. I ended the call and looked at Nora across the table. Garrett was not the architect. The thought arrived without heat the way the clearest realizations do. He was the instrument. My sister had built the mechanism, set the terms, and handed him exactly what he needed to take it apart from the inside. "What did he say?" Nora asked. "That Sloan opened the account. Her name first." Nora closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked like someone who had spent 3 years hoping to be wrong. We sat with it for a moment, a corner table in Evanston, a sleeping child in a stroller between us, the quiet of something finally named. At 1:22 p.m., Roland sent a document with 4 lines of text beneath it. Oregon Secretary of State Business Registry. Meridian Consulting LLC, member of record Gary Whitmore. Cross-referenced with Oregon Circuit Court name change filing 6 years ago. Previous legal name, Garrett W. Hale. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table the way Nora had set hers and looked out at November Street. The man I had married had a different name before I met him. The company draining my accounts was registered to that name. And somewhere in Portland, there was a paper trail suggesting this pattern had worked before. After Evanston, I drove south. Not to the house, I wasn't ready for that. And more practically, there was nothing there I needed yet that wasn't already in the duffel in the trunk. I drove to the park instead, the wide lakefront path that ran along the eastern edge of Lincoln Park, where Finn had spent most of last summer chasing Canada geese, with a level of commitment that suggested he had a strategy, even if the geese disagreed. In November, the geese were long gone, but the path was clear enough to walk, and Finn had been in a stroller or a car seat for most of the morning, and we both needed to move. I parked on Cannon Drive and lifted him out. The cold hit us both at once, clean and sharp, the kind of cold that feels honest after hours of heated indoor air. Finn accepted it without complaint, zipped his jacket to the chin the way I'd taught him, and immediately began narrating. The tree with the split trunk, the bench with the green paint chipping, the The gull standing very still on the ice at the edge of the frozen inlet, one leg tucked up, apparently unbothered by everything. "That bird is sleeping," Finn said. "I think you're right," I said. He considered the gull for a moment with the evaluating look he brought to things he found genuinely interesting. Then he crouched down, picked up a smooth gray stone from the edge of the path, and put it in his jacket pocket. "What's that for?" I asked. "For later," he said, and stood up and kept walking. We had been on the path for maybe 20 minutes when he said it. Not looking at me, looking out at the frozen water, watching the gull which had shifted position and was now examining something in the ice with focused attention. "Grandma Dolores brought papers to our house," he said. "She put them in Daddy's study." I took one more step before I stopped. Dolores was my mother, a woman who had called me every Sunday for 30 years, who had held Finn the day he came home from the hospital, who asked about my work schedule with the attentive regularity I had always read as love. I turned to Finn without changing the quality of my voice. "When was that, sweetheart?" "Before Halloween." He picked up a small stick and dragged it along the path railing as we resumed walking. "She came when you were at work. She had a folder." He paused, giving this detail its proper weight. "She said not to tell you because it was going to be a surprise." I held his hand and kept walking. My mother. She had been in my home, had used her key, the one I had given her years ago for emergencies, and she had delivered a folder of documents to my husband while I was 40 minutes away, running a board meeting. And then, she had looked at my 5-year-old son and told him it was a surprise, that he shouldn't say anything to his mother. She had recruited him into the secret. Not maliciously, perhaps. Finn wouldn't have understood that framing, and she would have known it. But she had used his trust, his natural deference to adults he loved, to create a small, specific silence in my house. A silence I might never have known about if he hadn't been watching a gull on the ice this afternoon and decided to mention it. "Did Grandma Dolores visit a lot?" I asked. Finn thought about it. "Sometimes. When you were at work." He said it without inflection, the way children report facts that seem obvious to them. "She always left before you came home." I said, "Thank you for telling me, Bub." He looked up at me, slightly puzzled by the formality of my gratitude, then shrugged and returned his attention to the path. We drove to the company apartment after the park, a 2-bedroom unit on the 5th floor of a building near the Evanston waterfront that my hotel group maintained for visiting executives and extended stay business travel. I had used it twice before for work. It was quiet, fully stocked, and belonged to no one in particular, which was exactly what I needed tonight. Finn could spread out. There was a proper kitchen, and no one knew we were there. I put Finn in front of a movie with a bowl of cereal he considered an exceptional dinner, and called Margot from the kitchen with the door half closed. I told her what Finn had said, word for word, as precisely as a 5-year-old's account allowed. Margot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The second IP address, the one Roland flagged yesterday from the Miami account login history, the residential zip code we hadn't resolved yet." "Yes," and I said. I had Roland finish the geolocation cross-reference this afternoon. He used the IP data from the bank's access logs, which you're entitled to as an account holder, and mapped it against public ISP routing records. It resolved to a specific address. A pause that felt deliberate. "It's registered to Bernard and Dolores Ashworth, North Shore." Bernard was my father. Dolores was my mother. They had lived in the same house on the North Shore for 27 years. I sat down at the kitchen table. I thought about every Sunday call, Dolores asking how the week had gone, which nights had run long, whether I was working the weekend. I had answered her every time easily, openly, the way you answer someone whose interest in your life feels like one of its reliable constants. I had been filing reports without knowing I was filing them. She had been forwarding them without me knowing she was doing it. "Elise," Margot said carefully, "are you all right?" "Yes," I said, because I was not in the sense of feeling nothing, but in the sense of still being functional, still being able to see the next step clearly even when the ground directly beneath me had just moved. I'll get a formal subpoena for the full IP access history, Margot said. And I'll need to speak with you about how you'd like to handle the conversation with Dolores. Not yet, I said. Not until we have everything. We ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment with the city lights beginning to come on outside the window, the lake a dark line beyond the buildings. I thought about what Finn had said about the papers. I thought about what it meant that my mother had a key to my house and had used it to deliver documents to a man who had been draining my accounts for 14 months. I thought about the particular shape of a betrayal that has the texture of love, the way it uses every access you ever granted willingly, every door you left open because you trusted the person who might walk through it. I turned off the kitchen light at 8:30. I checked the front door lock twice, then the window latch. I sat in the dark for a while. I had one name left to look at directly, and I still wasn't ready for what it was going to tell me. Before I reveal what I found out about my husband's past comment, tell me if you're ready. Because this was the moment I understood I was never the first. Just a note, what follows includes some fictional elements shaped for storytelling. Names, places, and details may not be entirely factual. If you'd prefer to stop here, that choice is entirely yours. The name Gary Whitmore sat in my phone like a splinter small enough to ignore, impossible not to feel. I asked Margot to find Owen. Her investigator took 48 hours. Those 2 days in the Evanston apartment had a suspended quality, the feeling of a pause that wasn't restful, the way a held breath isn't the same as breathing. Finn occupied himself with the things 5-year-olds find in any space, the kitchen drawer full of takeout menus he sorted by color, the hallway with enough clearance to run 3 steps before turning. The window that looked out on a courtyard where a maintenance worker came and went twice, and became in Finn's ongoing private narrative a character named Harold, who was building something important. I worked at the kitchen table. I slept in 4-hour intervals. I waited. On the morning of the 17th, Margot called. Her name is Owen Mercer, she said. She's 43. She lives in Portland, has for the past 6 years. She was briefly married to a man named Gary Whitmore approximately 8 years ago. The marriage lasted 27 months. She filed for divorce. A pause. She reverted to her maiden name immediately after. The divorce records were public Oregon Judicial Department accessible through the state's online case registry. The investigator had located them within the first day. The second day had been spent confirming that Owen Mercer was findable, reachable, and this was the part Margot's voice went careful around, apparently not surprised to be found. I asked if she'd be willing to speak with you, Margot said. She said yes. She said yes immediately. Margot used that word specifically, and I noted it. The video call connected at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Owen Mercer appeared on the screen, in what looked like a home office bookshelves, a window with gray Pacific Northwest light, coming through it a coffee mug she held in both hands. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they have had years to arrive at a particular feeling, and have finally made their peace with it. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, before I had asked anything, "He did it to you too." It wasn't a question. I said, "Tell me what happened." She did. She was precise, the kind of precise that comes from having told a story to yourself so many times that you've worn it down to its essential facts. Gary Whitmore had come into her life through a professional connection, a colleague's introduction at an industry event in Portland 7 years ago now. He was attentive, capable, the kind of man who remembered small things you mentioned in passing and brought them back in ways that felt like being genuinely known. 2 years in, he suggested restructuring their finances. Her investment accounts were fragmented across different institutions. He said it would be more efficient to consolidate, and he could manage that transition. She had been busy. She had trusted him. She had signed the account amendments without reviewing the full terms. The life insurance came next. A policy loan, he said, for a short-term investment opportunity, the kind that required quick capital and would return significantly more than the loan cost. He had power of attorney. She had given it to him for estate planning purposes and had not thought to limit its scope. $47,000 over 14 months, gone before she noticed the pattern. When I confronted him, Owen said, he said it was a business investment that had underperformed. He said he'd pay it back. He had documentation fabricated, as it turned out, but convincing enough that I spent 2 months trying to decide whether I was overreacting. She looked at me steadily. By the time I hired an attorney, he'd already filed for divorce. He was 3 months ahead of me. The same 3 months. I thought about the divorce petition I had found on the dresser Cook County filed in August not yet served. The same gap. The same strategy of getting ahead. There was a settlement, I said. A confidentiality agreement. Owen nodded. I signed a civil NDA as part of the divorce terms. I was told it was standard that it prevented me from making public statements about the financial dispute. She set her coffee mug down. What I wasn't told clearly enough was that a civil NDA is a private contract. It can prevent me from going to the press or discussing it voluntarily. It cannot prevent me from testifying if a court orders me to. She paused. I've known that for about 4 years. I've been waiting for someone to issue the order. After the call, Margot confirmed what Owen had indicated: a subpoena would supersede the NDA entirely. Owen would receive one through proper channels, and she had already indicated she would comply. Her testimony, the same pattern 8 years prior, executed with the same mechanisms, would establish that the conduct directed at me was not a first attempt. It was a refinement. But there was one more thing I needed to understand before the call ended. The settlement payment, I said. $45,000. Do you know where it came from? Owen was quiet for a moment. It came through a limited liability company. Not Gary's, a different one with no direct connection to him on paper. I only found out later through my own attorney that the LLC had ties to a family member of his. She looked at me carefully. His father-in-law, the one he had at the time. His father-in-law at the time, my father. I always assumed someone put Gary up to it, Owen said. The scheme was too well organized for someone with no experience. Someone had to have designed the structure. I just couldn't prove who. She paused. I'm sorry I couldn't do more then. I hope what I have helps you now. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat beside the window for a long time. I had opened it a few inches while we talked, a habit, a need for outside air when the inside of a room becomes too weighted. The November cold came in steadily. I didn't close it. Bernard, my father, a man who had walked me down the aisle, who had held Finn at the hospital the day after he was born, who called on my birthday every year without fail, and always remembered the exact number of candles. Dolores, my mother, who had a key to my house and had used it to deliver documents to a man she had apparently helped recruit into my life. I needed to understand how far back this went. I needed to understand who had drawn the original blueprint before Sloane's resentment, before Garrett's method, before the LLC in Portland and the account in Miami. I needed to find the beginning, and I was fairly certain, sitting in the cold with the window open, that the beginning had a gambling debt attached to it. Roland called on a Tuesday morning with the tone he reserved for numbers that embarrassed him. Not the careful, measured voice he used when explaining legal exposure, or the deliberate pacing he employed when reciting transfer dates and routing numbers. This was flatter. Controlled in the way a person controls a door they are closing against something they don't want to let in. I need you to come in, he said. Or we can do this by phone, but you'll want to be sitting down either way. It was 8:47 a.m. Finn was already at daycare on Davis Street, a small, well-lit center I'd used since he was 18 months old. I had chosen it for its background-checked staff, its window-to-wall ratio, and the fact that it kept children occupied with actual activities, rather than a screen in the corner. That morning, I was grateful for the specific distance it placed between him and this conversation. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink and sat at the kitchen table. Tell me, Roland had followed the Meridian Consulting LLC thread further than I expected. After Owen's testimony about the $45,000 settlement paid through a third-party entity, he had pulled the LLC's operating history, not just the Oregon state registration, but the full transaction record Margot had obtained through subpoena. What he found was that Meridian had not been created for me. It had been created before me. The first documented use of the Meridian account predated my marriage by nearly 4 years. In that earlier period, a single transfer of $45,000 passed through the LLC to Owen Mercer's divorce settlement. The payment was recorded as a consulting disbursement. There was no invoice attached, no service rendered. Roland had traced it backward through 2 holding accounts before landing on a name I already knew: Bernard Ashworth. My father. I did not say anything for a moment. Outside the window, a delivery truck idled on the street below. I watched it pull away. "Keep going," I said. Bernard had accumulated a gambling debt, $120,000 owed to a private creditor based in northwestern Indiana. Not a casino marker, not a documented loan. The kind of debt that does not go through a bank and does not generate a paper trail unless someone is specifically looking for one. Roland had found it through property lien records. A lien placed on Bernard and Dolores's North Shore home in the spring of 2016, later removed. The removal coincided with the first Meridian disbursement. Garrett, at that point still operating under his legal name Garrett W. Hale, had entered the family through Bernard's introduction approximately 10 months after the lien was cleared. Bernard had presented him as a business associate, someone with connections in commercial real estate. Dolores had approved of the introduction warmly. I had been 29, focused on a hotel acquisition in the western suburbs, and I had not asked questions I should have asked. The structure, once Roland described it, was not complicated. Bernard needed a way to manage the debt and keep it invisible from Dolores and from me. Garrett provided financial access and a willingness to work within legal gray areas. In exchange, Bernard provided him with something of greater value: entry, credibility, a family willing to accept him without scrutiny. Sloane's role was the binding element. She had known Garrett before I did, briefly, in the way people in overlapping social circles know each other, and she had her own grievance against our family's financial structure. Her tuition payments had been funded through a trust that closed the year I took over the hotel group. She had never said this directly to me. She had written it in a navy notebook with the words, "What she owes me," printed in her handwriting on the first page. The $4,200 receipt I had found on the entryway floor in Task 1, torn, partial, ink-smeared, was now fully explained. It was a cash withdrawal from First National Bank of Miami sub-account 7731 under G. Whitmore and S. Hargrove. Sloane had withdrawn that amount in cash the afternoon of November 13th, the day before she arrived at the Lincoln Park house. The withdrawal appeared in the account log Roland had subpoenaed. The date and amount matched. I thought about her walking into that branch, presenting identification, receiving the bills. I thought about the fact that she had done it the day before coming to my house, to sleep in my bed. I kept my voice even when I called Margot. Civil conspiracy. Margot confirmed when I reached her at noon. Under Illinois law, civil conspiracy required demonstrating that 2 or more parties agreed to commit an unlawful act that caused harm. Bernard's facilitation of Garrett's access to marital accounts, combined with his prior use of Meridian to silence Owen, constituted actionable civil conspiracy. The framework did not require a criminal conviction. It required documentation, a pattern, and a financial judgment. "He won't go to prison," Margot said. "I know," I said. "But the North Shore property." "I know," I said again. I spent the afternoon at Roland's office on LaSalle reviewing the timeline. Finn had extended daycare until 6. I did not eat lunch. I drank 2 cups of Roland's coffee, which was better than I expected from a man who kept packets of instant oatmeal in his filing cabinet. By the time I returned to the Evanston apartment, the sky had gone dark at 4:30 in the way it does in Chicago in November, without ceremony or gradual dimming. Just light and then the absence of it. I checked on Finn. He was asleep with a picture book spread open across his chest, face turned slightly toward the window. I moved the book to his nightstand and stayed in the doorway for a moment. The voicemail came at 9:17 p.m. I didn't recognize the number at first. It was a North Shore area code. The voice belonged to someone older male, unhurried. Elise, this is Clifton Abernathy. I live at the end of your block, the Gray 2 flat. We've spoken at the park a few times when your boy was feeding the pigeons. I'm holding something I think belongs in a lawyer's hands. Please call me back. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the message ended. Clifton Abernathy, retired early 70s, silver-haired, always with a thermos at the park bench, had lived on our block for 11 years. He had spoken to me perhaps 4 or 5 times. He knew Finn's name because Finn had told him. I did not know what he was holding. I did know that I would call him first thing in the morning. I had not been back to this street since the night I left. Driving down Maple in the early morning carried a particular strangeness, the way a familiar place feels, slightly altered when you have been gone just long enough for it to register differently. The elm trees stood at their same intervals. The neighbor across the street still left his recycling bins out a day early. The sidewalk still buckled at the corner where the silver maple root had been pushing up the concrete for years, despite 3 different city repair tickets. Everything in its place. Nothing the same. I parked one house down from Clifton Abernathy's Grade 2 flat at 9:52 a.m. His front porch light was on, not a motion sensor but a steady, deliberate amber. He opened the door before I reached the bottom step. Clifton was 68, a civil engineer for 31 years before retiring, and he had lived on Maple Street for 22 years. He carried his age with structural solidity, the way a well-built retaining wall holds. He shook my hand, gestured toward the front sitting room, and said, "I'll get to it," which I appreciated. On the low table between us sat a manila envelope, cream brown, its flap folded loosely but not sealed. It had been handled carefully. About 8 months ago, Clifton said, "Your husband came to my door, said he needed temporary storage for documents during a renovation, asked if I'd hold an envelope until he picked it up." He paused. I put it in the hall cabinet and didn't touch it for 6 months. Then one afternoon in early October, a delivery driver held the screen door too long, and the draft knocked the cabinet open. The envelope fell. The unsealed flap pulled back enough for the top sheet to be visible. I looked at it for about 4 seconds. Clifton said. Then I closed it. What I saw were columns, dates, numbers, account numbers. I worked in project finance for a long time. You learn what a financial routing table looks like. He met my eyes. The handwriting wasn't Garrett's. His runs large and forward slanting. Whatever was on that sheet was smaller, more precise. Someone who wrote like they were fitting a lot of information into a small space. I did not pick up the envelope. I looked at it. Margot had told me early in this process that chain of custody was not a formality, it was an argument. Every ungloved hand, every unwitnessed transfer was a seam opposing counsel could pull. I had learned to leave things where they sat and make the call. I called Margot at 10:07 a.m. I described the envelope, the table, Clifton's account of how the flap had come open. I told her I had not touched anything. She said, "Don't. I'm sending someone within the hour." While we waited, Clifton told me about the security camera mounted above his front porch, a standard 1080p system installed 4 years prior after a package theft on the block. It faced outward toward the street and neighboring properties. Its retention window was 90 days. Within that window, after seeing the envelope's contents, he had reviewed the footage. He had found 11 instances of Sloan parking a dark sedan in front of my house and entering through the front door using a key, not ringing the bell, not knocking. A key. On occasions when my black Lexus was not in the driveway. Visits ranging from 40 minutes to 2 hours and 17 minutes. He had logged the dates by hand before calling me. I read them. 3 overlapped with confirmed travel weeks, a board meeting out of state, an acquisition review in Atlanta, a 2-night property inspection in Milwaukee. Dates Garrett had known because he had asked about my schedule. Dates Dolores had known because I always called when I landed. Margot's colleague arrived at 10:41 a.m., a process server working under legal hold. The envelope was bagged and logged in front of Clifton, who signed a witness affidavit on the spot. The USB drive was forensically imaged on site with Clifton retaining the original. Everything documented, everything time-stamped. Before I left, Clifton walked me to the door. "I should have called sooner," he said. I kept thinking there was an explanation I hadn't thought of. "A lot of people thought that," I said. He nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't need a response. I walked back to my car and sat with my hands in my lap for a moment. The elm trees, the recycling bins, the buckled corner, the same street. My phone rang. Dolores' mom. Her voice was warm and careful in the way it always was, the particular register she used when calling about something she had already decided how to present. "Elise, sweetheart, are you all right? I've been so worried about you." I looked at my house through the windshield. Every window curtain was drawn. Garrett had never kept the curtains closed. Not once in 4 years. Something had changed, and my mother was calling me the morning I came back to look. I sat in the car on Maple Street with the engine still running and Dolores's voice in my ear, warm, familiar, practiced, and I thought she has called me like this my entire life. I had never heard the rehearsal underneath it. "Sweetheart, are you eating? Are you getting enough sleep?" "I'm fine," I said. "Finn and I are staying with a friend. Things with Garrett are complicated right now. I'll be in touch." Of course, of course. You know your father and I are here if you need anything at all." "I know," I said. "I'll call you soon." I ended the call and sat for a moment looking at the front of my house. The curtains were still drawn. A city street sweeper moved slowly at the far end of the block, orange light revolving in the gray morning. I put the car in drive and did not look back. Margot was on the phone by the time I reached the expressway on-ramp. I told her about Dolores's call, the timing, the tone, the specific register of studied concern that I had only recently learned to read correctly. I asked her whether I should record the next call. Margot was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was choosing words with particular care. "No," she said. "Illinois requires all-party consent for recorded phone calls. If you record Dolores without her knowledge, we cannot introduce that recording as direct evidence in court without creating a significant legal challenge. Opposing counsel would move to suppress it, and depending on the judge, they might succeed. More importantly, it hands them a procedural argument they don't currently have. One go. Then what do I do with what she says?" "You listen," Margot said. "You remember. What she tells you shapes what questions I ask under oath. It tells us what to subpoena. Phone records call logs location data, those come through proper channels and they don't require her consent. What she says to you privately becomes the map. The subpoena is the instrument." I understood the distinction. There was a difference between evidence and intelligence. Margot had explained this to me once before, early on in the context of the financial transfers. The goal was not to accumulate everything, it was to collect the right things in the right way so that nothing could be taken back. I drove to the Evanston apartment and spent the rest of the afternoon with Finn, who had graduated from his daycare's Tuesday art project with a painting of what he described as a blue horse standing in snow. He told me its name was Captain, the same name he'd given the second pigeon on the Michigan Avenue ledge back in November, which I did not point out. I taped it to the refrigerator door and made grilled cheese, and I did not think about Dolores until after he was asleep. The following morning, I called her back. It was 8:14 a.m. Finn was at daycare. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and the view of the lake through the apartment's narrow east-facing window, a strip of gray water flat and very still in the cold. She answered on the third ring. "Elise, I'm so glad you called. I have a question," I said. "Did you come to the house in October before Halloween?" A pause. Not long, 2 seconds, perhaps 3. But I had worked in negotiation rooms for 15 years, and I knew the difference between a pause that means I'm thinking and a pause that means I'm deciding. Elise, I just stopped by to drop off some paperwork that your father needed Garrett to sign. It was nothing, it was just, did you give Garrett my schedule? The pause this time was longer. Outside the window, the lake was the color of old pewter. A single white gull moved across the lower corner of the frame and disappeared. Elise. Her voice had shifted, still careful, but the warmth had gone thin at the edges. Your father had a situation, a serious one, and Garrett said he could help us. I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't understand what was going to happen. I set my coffee cup down. You told Finn to keep a secret, I said. Silence. Not the considered silence of someone choosing words. The other kind. He's 5 years old, I said. You asked a 5-year-old child to keep a secret from his mother. Dolores did not answer. I could hear her breathing slightly uneven, the way breathing gets, when a person is holding something back that is not quite grief and not quite guilt, and is perhaps the combination of both that happens when someone has done a thing they cannot fully explain even to themselves. I did not raise my voice. There was no version of this conversation in which raising my voice would have meant anything. I have to go, I said. Elise, please, I was trying to protect. I know what you were trying to protect, I said. I ended the call. I sat at the table for a long time, the strip of lake through the window, gray and still. She had been frightened. Bernard's debt had frightened her in the particular way that financial ruin frightens people who have spent their lives arranging security, not just the loss of money, but the loss of the structure that money represents. The house, the standing, the appearance of a life that had been carefully maintained. I understood that. I understood it in the way I understood a lot of things about Dolores now that I had not understood before, and understanding it did not change the nature of what had happened. She had given Garrett my schedule. She had known what the papers were, or known enough. She had put her hand on her grandson's shoulder and asked him to be silent about something a 5-year-old child had no framework to carry. Fear was a reason. It was not an excuse. There was a difference, and I intended to make sure that difference was part of the record. I called Margot at noon and told her what Dolores had said. Margot asked me to write it down in as much detail as I could recall and send it to her encrypted file share within the hour. The language would form the basis of my own testimony. The phone record subpoena had already been filed that morning before I made the call, standard practice, she said. Once a party becomes a person of interest in discovery. Dolores's cooperation had been fear-based, not malicious. That distinction mattered. In Illinois, civil conspiracy required a showing of intent to participate in the unlawful act. Fear-based compliance sat in a different category than active design. Margot would argue accordingly. Margot called at 6 p.m. Garrett was served this afternoon, she said in the flat, even tone that meant the information was significant, and she was delivering it without editorializing. Counter petition filed at 2:47 p.m. Cook County Circuit Court. His attorney has 10 days to respond. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the last of the November light leave the lake. And then, I said. And then, Margot said, it begins. December in Chicago is a different kind of cold than November. November cold still carries an argument, the last of the leaves, the occasional afternoon, where the temperature relents for an hour, and you remember what it felt like before. December has already decided. By the time you step outside on a December morning and the air hits the back of your throat, before you've reached the bottom step, the season has stopped negotiating. The conference room on the 14th floor of the LaSalle Street building was warm in the way institutional spaces are warm, overcompensating, slightly stale, the kind of heat that comes from a central system that runs at the same temperature regardless of what is happening in the room. There were 2 pitchers of water on the table. A court reporter sat at the end with her stenography machine and the practiced stillness of someone who had heard every version of every story and was no longer moved by any of them. Margot and I arrived first. I had worn a gray wool blazer and dark slacks. Margot had told me once early in the process that in a deposition room, the goal was to be the least interesting-looking person present. Let the documents do the work. I had taken that instruction seriously. Garrett arrived 7 minutes later with his attorney Leonard Price, a compact man in his mid-50s, with a good suit, and the particular confidence of someone who has spent decades in rooms like this one. He was competent. I had done enough negotiation across conference tables to recognize competence when I saw it. What I also recognized, watching him arrange his legal pad and pen with a fraction too much deliberateness, was that he had not seen our full evidence package before this morning. That was Margot's design. In Illinois discovery, you are required to disclose what you intend to use, but the sequence in which you present it is yours. Garrett looked at me once when he sat down. I looked back. Neither of us said anything. Margot placed the first document on the table at 9:17 a.m. Roland's Financial Analysis 41 pages tab divided the full $94,000 breakdown across 3 funding streams. Garrett's name appeared on every transfer authorization. His signature, verified against signature cards from 2 separate financial institutions, appeared on the co-trustee withdrawal forms for Finn's college fund. Leonard Price objected to the foundation for 2 of the sub-exhibits. The objections were noted by the court reporter for the judge to consider later. Margot moved forward. The second set, Meridian Consulting LLC registration records from the Oregon Secretary of State, the registered agent, Gary Whitmore, the registered address, a mail forwarding service in Portland. Alongside it, the Oregon Circuit Court record of a legal name change, Garrett W. Hale to Gary Whitmore, filed 6 years prior. I watched Garrett's hands on the table. They had been relaxed when he sat down loose at the wrist, the way someone sits when they believe they have prepared for this. When the Oregon documents appeared, his left hand moved slightly inward, not a flinch, something more controlled than that, and came to rest with the fingers curled. Third set, First National Bank of Miami account records for G. Whitmore and S. Hargrove, account number ending in 7731, opened 19 months prior. All 3 funding streams converging in the same account. Price objected on relevance grounds. The objection was noted. Fourth, IP address logs from the Miami account's login history. 2 addresses. One tracing to a Lincoln Park residential ISP registered to Garrett Hale. The second tracing to a North Shore address registered to Bernard and Dolores Ashworth. Garrett's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, the kind that requires knowing a face to see, but I had known his face for 4 years. I saw it. 5th Clifton Abernathy's security footage log. 11 documented entries. Dates, timestamps, duration. The accompanying affidavit from Clifton notarized and signed. 3 entries highlighted with their corresponding dates, matched against Elise's confirmed travel records: Atlanta, Milwaukee, Indianapolis. Price noted that the footage source was a third-party residential property and raised a question about its collection methodology. Margot provided the forensic imaging documentation and the subpoena under which the footage had been obtained. The objection was noted. She moved forward. Sixth, the financial plan recovered from Clifton's hall cabinet. The original now in a clear evidence sleeve after proper chain of custody processing. 8 pages, handwritten columns of dates and transfer amounts and account numbers. Margot placed the forensic examiner's report beside it, a qualified document examiner retained through a firm with prior Illinois court certifications. The report compared the handwriting in the financial plan to known writing samples from Sloan Hargrove, obtained from 2 signed lease documents on file with a Chicago property management company. The conclusion, stated in the examiner's language, was that the writing in the financial plan was consistent with the known samples of Sloan Hargrove to a high degree of probability. Garrett became very still. Not the calculated stillness of someone managing their presentation. The other kind, the kind that comes from a person who has just seen a wall they believed would hold, begin to shift. Price asked for a brief recess at 11:34 a.m. In the hallway, I stood with a cup of water near the window. The river below was a dark stripe between the buildings. Margot stood beside me. He can't account for Sloane's handwriting in those documents, she said quietly. He can argue about account access, about his name change, about the transfers. Those are complicated arguments, and complicated arguments take time. But he can't stand in front of a judge and say he doesn't know how Sloane Hargrove's handwriting came to be in a financial plan that maps exactly onto his wife's stolen assets. I said nothing. Price will contact me within the week, Margot said. He'll want to talk about settlement terms. I looked at the river. Don't, I said. Margot paused. Don't negotiate. Don't negotiate, I said. She nodded once. We went back inside. That evening, I found Finn on the living room floor of the Evanston apartment working through a puzzle he had started 2 days earlier, a 100-piece image of a lighthouse on a rocky coast, the kind of puzzle marketed for ages 7 and up that Finn had decided was acceptable for age 5, because as he had explained to me with complete seriousness, he was almost 6. All the pieces were placed except one. He held it up, a small wedge of gray-blue sky at the upper left corner, and looked at it with the particular concentration he brought to things that required the last small effort. "Mama," he said, "this is the last one." I sat down beside him on the floor and guided his hand to the corner where the piece belonged. He pressed it in. The lighthouse was complete. I kept my hand over his for a moment. "There it is," I said. Nora arrived on a Saturday evening with Thai food from a place on Davis Street, and an expression I had been expecting in some form since the cafe in November. She had something else to tell me. She had been carrying it for 3 weeks, and had not yet found the right way to set it down. I took the bags from her at the door and did not ask. I had learned in the past month that the things people needed to say arrived on their own schedule, and pushing only made them harder to receive. I put the containers on the counter and found plates, and we sat at the kitchen table the way people sit when they are pretending briefly that the evening is ordinary. Finn was asleep at the end of the hall. I could hear the small white noise machine I had started running in his room since the hotel, a habit that had followed us to the apartment, and that I suspected would follow us for some time after this was over. The sound of it, low and constant, meant that whatever we said at the kitchen table would stay at the kitchen table. We ate for a while without talking much. The pad CU was good. The apartment was warm. Outside, the temperature had dropped below 20, and the wind off the lake was doing what lake wind does in December, not gusting, but pressing the sustained weight of cold air against every window simultaneously. "I have something else," Nora said. She set her fork down and reached into her bag and took out her phone. She did not explain anything first. She found what she was looking for, placed the phone on the table between us, and pressed play. The voice was Sloane's. 3 years of not hearing it in this particular register. Loose, slightly imprecise, the vowels softened in the way they get when someone has had 2 or 3 glasses of something and has stopped editing themselves, and yet I recognized it immediately. The way you recognize a voice you have known your entire life, regardless of context. Nora. Hey, I know it's late. I needed to say this to somebody. She's going to fall. I've been planning this for a very long time, and she doesn't even see it coming. She never sees anything that isn't on a spreadsheet. A pause. The sound of a glass being set down. She has everything. She's always had everything. I just want what's mine. The message ended. The kitchen was very quiet. The white noise machine at the end of the hall. The wind against the windows. The sound of the refrigerator cycling on. I did not say anything right away. I looked at the phone on the table, the screen already darkened, and I thought about the version of Sloane who had made that call standing somewhere 3 years ago in whatever apartment or bar or late-night kitchen holding a glass, deciding to say out loud the thing she had been telling herself privately for long enough that it had started to feel like a fact. She's going to fall. Not I think. Not I'm hoping. A statement of a planned outcome delivered to a mutual friend at some late hour when the planning felt too large to hold alone. She called me on a Wednesday, Nora said. In December 3 years ago. I was in bed. I almost didn't listen to it until the morning. She was looking at the table. When I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have context for it yet. I thought maybe it was just. I thought maybe it was nothing. Jealousy. Venting. I kept it because I didn't know what else to do with it. How many times did you listen to it? Nora looked up. Maybe 50, she said. I nodded. I kept thinking I was waiting for the right moment, she said. But I think I was actually just waiting to not be afraid of it anymore. And then November happened and you came back, and I still wasn't not afraid of it. I just didn't have the option of waiting anymore. The table between us held the remains of a meal and a phone, and the particular silence of two people who have known each other long enough to understand that some things cannot be made easier by the right phrasing. I should have told you the first time I saw them together, Nora said. 3 years ago. I'm sorry that I didn't. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind shifted. The windows held. You told me when you could, I said. That's what I have to work with. I paused. I don't know if I can tell you that it's fine. It isn't entirely fine, but I haven't finished with you. If that means something. Nora looked at me for a long moment. It means something, she said. She did not cry. I had the sense she had done whatever crying there was to do in the 3 weeks since the cafe in the privacy of her own apartment and her own reckoning, and had arrived here tonight already past the part that required tears. What was left was the plain fact of what she had brought and what I would do with it, and whether the friendship had enough structure left to hold the weight. I thought it did. I was not certain, but I thought so. I called Margot at 8:40 the following morning. I described the voicemail, the content, the timestamp on Nora's phone showing the original receipt date 3 years prior, the fact that it had been received on Nora's personal device without any interception or alteration. Margot asked me to have Nora bring the phone to her office that afternoon and to touch nothing on the device in the meantime. Under Illinois law, a voicemail message voluntarily left by one party on another party's phone belonged to the recipient. Nora had not recorded a conversation she had received a message. The distinction was legally significant. Sloane had chosen to speak those words into a phone and leave them on someone else's device. She had no expectation of privacy over a message she had deliberately sent. Margot's voice when I finished explaining what was on it was quiet in the specific way it got when something had arrived that was better than expected. Premeditation, she said. In her own words, 3 years before the transfers even started. Yes, I said. That changes the shape of the damages argument, Margot said. Punitive damages in a civil conspiracy case requires showing that the conduct was willful and deliberate. She handed us the evidence herself. I stood at the kitchen window. The lake was white at the horizon where the sky met the water, the color of a document that had not yet been written on. What's next? I said. Margot's answer was brief. Trial date is set, she said. January 14th, 8 weeks. Be ready. I told her I had been ready since November. The trial lasted 62 days. I won't tell you about all 62. Most of it was the particular tedium legal proceedings require. I will tell you the parts that mattered. Week 1. Roland walked the court through the same 41 pages he had shown me on LaSalle Street. The 3 funding streams, the structured transfers below, every alert threshold, all of it converging into account 7731 under the names G. Whitmore and S. Hargrove. The jury didn't need to understand forensic accounting. Roland made sure they didn't have to. Leonard Price challenged the chain of custody on the Clifton envelope. The challenge failed. The handwriting analysis was sustained. When Price finished his cross-examination, the finding had not moved. I sat at the plaintiff's table and watched Garrett listen. His hands were flat on the table. He had learned since the deposition to hold himself very still. Week 3. Owen Mercer testified by video from Portland at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. She was 43 and spoke without apparent anger, which was, I thought, the most persuasive thing about her. Anger gives opposing counsel something to work with. Owen gave them nothing. She described the same pattern executed 8 years prior: consolidated account access, a POA signed in trust. $47,000 withdrawn before she understood what was happening. The civil NDA had been issued under Oregon law. The Cook County subpoena superseded it. When Price cross-examined her, she answered briefly and completely. He had nothing to pull on. Week 5. The security footage, 11 entries each, showing Sloan letting herself into my house with a key while my car was absent. Her attorney argued the visits were benign. Then Margot played the voicemail. She's going to fall. I've been planning this for a very long time, and she doesn't even see it coming. The room went quiet in the particular way courtrooms go quiet when something cannot be unsaid. Sloane's attorney requested a recess. The judge granted 10 minutes. When proceedings resumed, the damages argument had changed shape. Week 7. Dolores took the stand under subpoena on a Wednesday morning in late February. She wore a dark blue coat. I recognized she had owned it for 6 years. She confirmed under oath that she had delivered papers to the Lincoln Park house in October, that she had provided my travel schedule to Garrett, that she had asked Finn to keep certain things private. She did not deny any of it. Her attorney argued coercion. The judge noted the argument and noted as well the detail that a 5-year-old had been asked to carry a secret on behalf of adults who should have protected him. March 18, 2025. The judge read the findings at 2:14 p.m. Full legal and physical custody of Finn awarded to me. Garrett ordered to repay $94,000 in full plus legal costs. Civil conspiracy judgment entered against Bernard Ashworth, a lien placed against the North Shore property. Sloan Hargrove's Miami condominium entered into Florida cross-state judgment enforcement proceedings. Dolores received a formal judicial admonishment, not a civil judgment, but a finding recorded in the court's order that her cooperation had been material to the scheme's execution. Garrett's file under the name Gary Whitmore was referred to the Oregon Financial Crimes Unit. That referral was not a conviction. It was a door opening. I did not make a speech in the corridor. Finn had been in childcare since 8 that morning. When I picked him up at 3:30 p.m., he was finishing a drawing, a small brown bird on a ledge, and beside it, in careful block letters, only slightly uneven, home. I folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of my coat against my chest. I lifted him and held him for a long time without saying anything. He let me. Every thread came to rest here. The red mark on his cheek, the open window in November, the notebook, the go bag, the receipt, the IP address, the 11 visits, the woman in Portland, the voicemail from someone who believed I would never look at anything that wasn't on a spreadsheet. She had been wrong about that. Justice doesn't require ceremony. It requires patience, precision, and the willingness to keep building the record until the record speaks for itself. I had done that. We went home. Spring comes to Chicago the way it always does, not gently but suddenly, as though the city decided overnight that it had endured enough and simply moved on. By May, the maple in the front yard was fully green, its leaves the particular shade that only exists for a few weeks before the summer heat deepens them to something darker and more settled. The light through the kitchen window in early May has a quality I had forgotten about over a long winter, gold-tinted, unearned feeling, the kind that makes you notice it because you know by now that it doesn't last, and you should pay attention while it's here. Finn had developed a new and entirely serious interest in birds. I did not know exactly when it had started. Somewhere between the hotel in November and the apartment in Evanston and the return to this house in late March, my son had become a person who stopped on sidewalks to observe sparrows and held up one hand, a small, imperious gesture, when he needed everyone around him to be quiet because something was happening in a tree. He had a notebook where he drew them labeled in his careful, uneven block letters. He had opinions about which ones were worth drawing and which ones were, as he put it, just walking around. Then Nora had given him the camera. It arrived the week after the judgment, a child's digital camera, yellow and gray, handed over without ceremony and without a card. The way Nora did things, she meant seriously. Finn had carried it with him everywhere since. He photographed the maple, a squirrel on the back fence, his cereal, his own feet, the underside of the kitchen table. Everything merited equal documentation. He had not yet developed a hierarchy of subjects. I found this admirable. On the morning of May 3rd, he was on the front porch before I finished my first cup of coffee. I heard the small mechanical click of the shutter through the open front door, a sound I had already learned to locate by instinct, the way you learn the sounds of a house and the sounds of a child and eventually stop separating them. I stood in the kitchen with my cup and listened to it. One click, a pause, another click, the sound of small feet on the porch boards shifting position. He came inside carrying the camera the way he carried things he considered important, with both hands extended slightly, the same deliberate two-handed offering he had used in November when he brought me the drawing of the six-legged dog in room 1408. I had not told him that. He had not learned it. It was simply the way he moved when he wanted to show me something that mattered to him. On the screen, a sparrow on the porch railing, slightly soft at the edges, the way photographs are when the subject is small and fast, and the photographer is 5 years old and very intent. The bird's head was tilted at an angle that suggested either curiosity or the particular alertness of a creature that lives by noticing things. One foot lifted, wings folded, settled at rest. I got it, Finn said with the complete satisfaction of someone who has been patient for a long time and has finally been right. I looked at the photograph for a moment. I thought but did not say about the pigeons on Michigan Avenue outside the hotel window in November. Finn naming each one in the cold morning light while I held Roland's preliminary report and tried to keep my hands steady. I thought about the bird story I had told him in room 1408 while he fell asleep, the one about the bird that flew a very long distance and found its way back. I thought about the gull I had watched cross the lower corner of the apartment window on the morning I called Dolores, the single white shape moving through gray air and disappearing. I thought about the drawing he had made on the day of the judgment, the small brown shape on a ledge, and the word beside it in careful, uneven letters. There are things that don't need to be said. They exist anyway. They hold their shape whether or not you name them. That's a good one, I said. Finn nodded. He already knew and went back outside to take more. I stood at the open front door with my coffee and looked up at the porch light above me. I had been meaning to replace the bulb since March when the days started lengthening and the urgency of the dark felt less pressing. I had bought the correct bulb 6 weeks ago and put it in the kitchen drawer to remind myself. I set my cup on the hall table, went to the kitchen, opened the drawer, and took it out. It took 4 minutes. I had to stand on the second step of the porch stairs to reach the fixture. I unscrewed the old bulb, burned out exactly as I had suspected, not the sensor, never the sensor. Just a bulb that had been dead for longer than anyone had bothered to address, and fitted the new one. Stepped down, switched it on. The light came on, clear and steady and exactly what a porch light should be. I stood on the front step in the May morning and looked at it for a moment. 4 years. I had mentioned it 3 times. I had stopped mentioning it. I had come home in its darkness on the worst night of my life and understood it as evidence of something: neglect, indifference, the specific weight of a promise made without intention of keeping. It had taken me 4 minutes to fix it myself. I stood there and thought about what else I had been waiting for someone else to do. Not long, just long enough. I picked up my coffee from the hall table and went inside. Finn was back at the kitchen table reviewing the morning's photographs with the focused seriousness of someone conducting an important assessment. He had 17 pictures. He moved through them slowly, nodding at some, tilting his head at others, occasionally pressing his lips together in the expression he used when he was deciding something. I sat across from him with my cup. The kitchen was warm. The maple moved in the May wind outside the window. The house was quiet in the way a house is quiet when it belongs to the people inside it. He looked up from the camera. he said with the complete certainty of a person stating a fact about themselves they have only just discovered, but already know to be permanent. Mama, I think I'm going to take pictures of birds forever. I looked at him across the kitchen table. 6 weeks past the judgment. 5 years old. Entirely certain. I thought he is 5 years old and he knows exactly what he wants to do forever. I thought that is enough. That is everything. I think that sounds exactly right, I said. The light was on. The window was closed. My son was naming the things he loved. That was enough to start, and it turned out more than enough to come home to. If you made it here, thank you, truly. I'm not telling you this story so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling it because someone out there is staring at a broken light in their own home waiting for someone else to fix it. I was that person. Don't be like me. Don't let family betrayal quietly hollow out everything you built. Don't ignore the signs of family betrayal simply because you love someone too much to look. And don't wait until family betrayal has already taken your money, your trust, and your child's innocence before you finally ask the right questions. Don't let family revenge be the road you're forced onto. Don't let family revenge be your only answer when patience and evidence can speak louder. And remember, the most powerful family revenge you will ever have is a life rebuilt entirely on your own terms. There's a reason Scripture says vengeance is mine. I set it down. I let justice do its work. Then I changed the light bulb myself. It took 4 minutes. My honest opinion, the people who plan your fall are counting on you never looking at the numbers. Look at the numbers. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. Upcoming stories contain fictional elements built entirely for reflection and education. If this content isn't right for you right now, step away, choose something that serves you better, and come back when you're ready.
And that's the last part of this story. I appreciate you being here. I'll see you next time.
Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, a little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. If I never met you, maybe I would know just how to heal, but now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true.